I'm done pretending that all Neopets were created equal. Some are clearly better than others. Today we're going to be discussing the very scientific method of me sliding Neopets on a scale of good to bad while haphazardly watching a reality TV show. Here's your fair warning that if you can't handle the hot take that Quiggles are an adaptation of a frog simply because the Neopets team had to have a frog, then you probably want to stop listening right now while we're still friends. Before I jump into top 5 and bottom 5 Neopets, I did break these up into categories to help explain my thought process behind what's a good Neopet and what's a bad Neopet. The first category I'm going to reference are the uninspired animal remakes because the Neopets team had to. The key thing to keep in mind here is that they're uninspired. They don't bring a whole lot of new ideas to the idea of the species that they're adapting. So you do have the flotsam that has a horn kind of like a narwhal, so that's a little on the edge there, but I would say that's largely there for the dolphin girls. The same as the uni. As you notice, the Quiggle's not on here because the Quiggle is part of a more elite group. To kickstart this whole thing, we're going to go with some low-hanging fruit. The 5th worst Neopet has got to be the Norbu. The Norbu came to light only because of the April Fool's prank, and everyone was like, oh my god, there's a llama. I would say the Norbu is an indicator of a group that I call filthy, unforgivable fan service, which is, you got this because you begged for it. There's no other reason for the Norbu to be a Neopet than they wanted to make the users happy, which is okay. Filthy fan service is good because you should give the fans what they want, but it doesn't mean I have to like it. The only reason why the Norbu is ranked in the uni isn't is because I have to give a shout out to the Neopets team for not giving into the horse girls. I don't know if you guys realize this, but most virtual pet sims are horse girl games, and horse girls are crazy about horses. The fact that we only had to concede one species to the unending horror that is horse girls is incredible. The Neopets team has much more of a backbone than anyone gives them credit for. Speaking of credit, I want to acknowledge that when I was a young teenager, I had original characters that were Anthro Neopets that I would roleplay on the Neo boards, and you can't make fun of me for it if I own up to it, so there we go. And I want to point out that the top 5 Neopets that I'm going to go through, they're not all in the best category. That being said, the number 5 best Neopet. Here we have the Akara. The Akara has a lot going on for it, right? It's a generally unoffensive Neopet. It's an aquatic cat. One of the really cool things about Akaras is it's definitely a product of the time it was designed in. This strange design with the smaller pupils and the 4 ears and the tendrils and the complexity of the design while it's still having thin line art and not giving too many physical features is interesting. It's definitely a product of the late 90s, early 2000s, and it's an indicator of the group that I'm going to call species that are definitely a product of their time. The 4th worst Neopet is going to be the Flotsam, and I'm going to be honest with you here. The only reason why the Flotsam is the 4th worst Neopet is because dolphins are the horses of the sea, and dolphin girls are just as bad as horse girls. The 4th best Neopet species is one of those species that really needs to exist in a virtual space because of the creativity. It's the Bori. And the Bori was launched during the Hannah and the Ice Caves site plot. It was a huge marketing push, and so much strategy went into releasing the Bori. You were able to get an ice Bori if you installed the Neopets toolbar during the plot. It's so cool to me how much research went into that, and the fact that the Bori is such a cute species, and it's such an inventive species, and it's the type of thing that demands Neopets.com existing so that you could have a Bori. To me, it's clearly one of the greatest species on Neopets because it is so fully Neopets. The next category only exists because I have a very public relationship with Neopets. Every time I tell people that I have a YouTube channel about Neopets, we tend to have a conversation about A, what Neopets is, B, if Neopets is still around, and C, what their relationship with Neopets is. Quite regularly, this will devolve into a conversation where they vaguely describe a species, and I get to guess which species they're describing because I have them all memorized, because if you play Neopets, there's not very many Neopet species, and it's an easy thing to do. These species have become ruined to me because of that game. These are the species that most often are mentioned as the species people who didn't really play Neopets that much, but have played it before, had as pets. The third worst Neopet, this is a really interesting pick, and I feel like a lot of people are going to have issues with this, but the Kugra is easily number 3 worst Neopet of all time. It is such a forgettable, unimaginative species that I forgot to put it on the slide of unimaginative species. It's just a copy and paste of a tiger. It doesn't bring anything new to the tiger format. It's just a tiger. And Jake, the explorer that brought us Crunchberry cereal, that's not worth rewarding. We should punish that. That cereal was awful. I'm not going to let that go anytime soon. We're not going to dwell on the negative. This is about the good too. And the third best Neopet species design is the drake. The drake is what I like to call dragon light. It was my initial dragon awakening to the idea that, hey, dragons actually might be kind of cool. I think that this is a very imaginative take on a species. It's a fantastical species. It warrants its existence on a virtual pet game because it's something that can't exist in real life. It's a really wonderful species. I think that it deserves to be high up on the list. It is the only limited edition species that is ranked on this list, and I think it deserves it. Third best Neopet. I think the elephant in the room is whether or not I'm going to rank the Vandegeyer. A disproportionate amount of the Neopets that are ranked are in this category of recently added Neopets. And recently added is something that you have to keep in mind in the context of the 55 species of Neopets. Very few of them have been added in the last 6 or so years, the Vandegeyer being the most recent Neopet added. I don't think that the Vandegeyer is worth ranking. I think it is a completely mid-tier Neopet. I think that the species design is great. I think that the illustration style does not match the Neopets canon at all, but the novelty of the species, the creativity behind it carries it through. It's a little bit too weeaboo for me, but that's forgivable. I like anime. I've watched a lot of Revolutionary Girl Utena lately. I think it would have been really fascinating to see the same concept of a panda owl, but released a decade ago. I would have really liked to see what that art would have looked like. But we're not in the business of shoulda, coulda, woulda. We're in the business of misery, and on our way to the top, the second worst Neopet design of all time has got to be the Ogren. And I know that I say this a lot and people don't like it, but the reason why I don't like it is, number one, I never remember how to pronounce it or spell it. Is it origin? In my head, I always think it's like origin or like organ with an I, but it's Ogren, which is an ugly name for a species. It's like a donkey giraffe. I don't recall ever asking for such a thing to exist, but they made it happen. By far, the worst part of it is that Donna, one of the site founders, okayed this species on her way out of the company, kind of out of spite for the new owners of the site. She said it so herself in an AMA. That's why Ogrins are pretty much top tier, worst Neopet. I don't want to just focus on the negative adaptions of real-life animals. I think it's really important that we also pay attention to the really interesting adaptions of real-life animals that make them accessible, enjoyable, and expand on the nuance and creativity of having a virtual pet site where we can have a new understanding of the species. And so these species, I think, do a good job of that. You know, the Tonu, the Bloomaroo. It took me a very long time to realize that Bloomaroos, which I would like to say are the second best Neopet species of all time, are an adaptation of kangaroos. it may seem obvious, but just look at how interesting that design is. The bloomeroo has a really cool species design, a very interesting illustration, and really cool site lore with a dope world. Where do I start with the monstrosity that is the worst Neopet species of all time? This creature exists for an unknown reason and has a whole world dedicated to them with a UU ball team that plays in the Altador Cup. That sort of validation, I don't understand why it was given to this Neopet. This is the Kiko. Why do they have a Band-Aid? What are they hiding under that Band-Aid? I don't trust them. They float. What? What is going on there? How does that work? Why do they have a lake? That is the most boring design for a world I've ever heard. The Kikos have a lake. I think, just hear me out here, that we should give the lake to a much more deserving species. Ticos, they have a mountain, but I think that Ticos could give this lake the justice it needs. Turn it into a hip-hoppin' spring break destination, because Kikos aren't doing anything interesting with it. They're being suspicious with their Band-Aids and floating, and I'm not here for it. I am, however, here for the best species of Neopets, which by far has to be the Aisha. Aishas are the good best boys of the entire website. They're like alien cats with these really cool antennas. They're aliens, but in a neat way because they have the extra ears. Their Moroccan form is extra creative. I think that the Aisha takes something that's really common, a cat, and then makes it interesting and creative and just adds an extra nuance of understanding to the species. They're cute. They do their best. I'm here for the Aisha. I love the Aisha. The Aisha is the pinnacle of Neopet species, my top #1 favorite. It's the best, and I rest my case. If you haven't already left a raging comment on this video telling me how wrong I am, I invite you to please share your ranking of the Neopets and your rationale. This was more of a hot take ranking of them that wasn't based off of popularity or ownership or covetability, but instead, frankly, my opinions of the species. I would really like to hear your guys' input, and I have no doubt that you're going to give it to me in the comments. Just please remember I am a person with feelings, and also that it's okay to find things funny, and it's also okay to not find things funny and be okay with it. Alright, cool. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Cody and Hannah for kind of prompting me to make this video. And I will see you guys all again very soon.